Okay, guys, so I want to give you a little rundown of what we're expecting out of your essay for Christopher Columbus. So, you guys spent the last 2 days looking at different resources about Christopher Columbus, and we told you as you were reading, be thinking, is he, deserving of this name of being a hero, or is he more of a villain in our history? So you guys saw a lot of different arguments, a lot of different sides to Columbus. So now it is time for you to decide. So in this assignment, you guys are going to come up with the argument. Do you think he should be considered a hero and Columbus Day be a national holiday? Or do you think that he's a villain and we should no longer accept Columbus Day as a national holiday, even though we know a lot of states have changed it to like Indigenous People Day? It still is technically a federal holiday. So you are going to write this argument here in this assignment. You'll see you want at least 2 pieces of evidence that you've learned throughout either your PLP, maybe you did your own research and found, another source that you wanted to use, and then the videos. You can use any of the things you learned there. You're going to pick 2 of the strongest pieces of evidence that support your argument. And then you're going to explain how those 2 pieces of evidence support your argument. Okay. And just in case, I know it's been a long time since some of us have maybe had to write kind of an argumentative piece, because I don't want this to be like an essay. This just has to be a paragraph. So I actually did an example that you guys can actually see, but I just want to kind of show you how this is laid out. So I didn't do an example on Columbus because I didn't want, to fog your ideas on Columbus, but I went with the example that we used in Bell Work with George Washington. So my essay or my paragraph that I wrote was arguing that George Washington was a hero and not a villain. And you see that I've color coded it, and this is the key to kind of show you what each sentence is representing, as far as like what we expect for you to be in your paragraph as well. So the very first one, that's easy. Most of us know, sometimes you call it a thesis if you're doing like a research paper. I call it a claim because this is just like a short argument here. So this is where you're going to tell us your side. So the side that I'm arguing is that George Washington is arguably one of the most important people in our history and should be considered a hero, even though he did participate in the institution of slavery. So I'm kind of introducing the other side. So I'm saying not only should he be a hero, this is why he's a hero, not a villain. So then I get into my first piece of evidence. So the first piece of evidence that I used is going into George Washington's role in America gaining its independence. So I tell, he's the commander of the Continental Army during the war, and he led basically a bunch of nobodies to a victory against the strongest British army in the world at the time. So that's my evidence. That's what I have learned about Washington. I know that to be true. The next sentence is where I'm going to explain how that proves how great he is. Do not assume that just because you've picked evidence that kind of goes with what you're saying, that I know what you mean. You need to tell me how that proves that you're right. Okay, so the next sentence there, or a couple sentences, that one's just a couple sentences. So I'm saying, so this shows how heroic he is because he had all odds against him. He was able to defeat the British, giving us our independence. We wouldn't even be potentially the United States of America had he not existed and won this war. Because, there was a lot of defeats during this war. So I've got there, I'm explaining to you why that makes somebody so heroic. Okay, that's what that next sentence does. Then I can go into my second piece of evidence, and that is actually I'm looking at what we call the counterclaim, the other side of the argument, and I'm trying to look at why people call him a villain. You don't have to do this. You just have to have a second piece of evidence. But in this argument, I think it's just habit that I do it this way. But I'm using evidence that should kind of disprove my claim, but I am using it to make my argument stronger as to why he's not a villain. So I'm saying, yeah, it's true that Washington owned more than 100 slaves during his lifetime, because he had over 300 at one point working on Mount Vernon. And many would claim that this would make him a villain because we know how awful slavery is. And we would say, hey, if he was really a true hero, he wouldn't have had slaves. But then I continue to go, at the time, slavery was not legal in the colonies. Hold on, babe. Ask daddy. Ask daddy. So slavery was not legal or slavery was legal all around the world at this time. So how could he really have known it was wrong? And even if he did know it was wrong, it had existed for so long that we can't really fault him for that. Okay. So I'm explaining why that evidence proves that he's not a villain. He is actually a hero. Still, that doesn't really take away from the greatness that he did. And then that last, that in the purple, is just my conclusion. It's, this is why Washington should be a hero, right? I'm giving my final thoughts to really sway the person that is reading this paragraph that I'm doing, okay? So this is kind of the format that yours should be. It doesn't have to be as long as mine was. I tend to be very wordy. It's not that you necessarily have to do that unless you yourself are wordy, but it does need to have all of these things. You need to make your claim. You have to have 2 pieces of evidence that you learned, over these past few days about Columbus. And then this is the part where most people drop the ball. What they don't do, they don't go in to explain why that evidence actually supports the side that they are on. Okay. So definitely make sure that can be done in a sentence, but it needs to be done. You need to don't make me do the thinking. You do the thinking for me. You tell me why that makes him a hero or a villain, whatever your argument is. And then a conclusion, most of us get that one down. That's just restating that claim and kind of making those final thought arguments in that last sentence. All right. So this is what we'll be looking for when we go to grade your guys's paragraphs. So make sure you've got all of these things in it, and you can use those resources that I have shared with you about George Washington to kind of help guide you, because I know it's been a long time. So I will let you guys get to it then. Sorry about my kids, but you're working at home. It's not going to let me end.